While the Germans hated American heavy machine guns in World War II for their incredible destructive power, the Americans, on the other hand, feared the terrifying rate of fire of the MG42. After all, it did not earn nicknames like Hitler's buzzsaw and bonesaw for nothing. But the real story is actually much darker, and as you could imagine, after hearing that sound tearing through the air toward you, it was more psychologically devastating than most people realize. Okay, so let us go back now and explain why and how what would turn out to be the MG42 was created. In World War I, machine guns proved to be devastating weapons that could mow down entire waves of attacking infantry. But the heavy, water-cooled designs of that era were cumbersome and difficult to move. As warfare became more mobile and the German military began rebuilding in the 1930s, they realized they needed something revolutionary. Not just another machine gun, but a universal machine gun that could serve every role, from light infantry support to heavy sustained fire to anti-aircraft defense. The Germans called this concept the Einheitsmaschinengewehr, or universal machine gun. It was an entirely new way of thinking about automatic firepower. The first attempt at this concept was the MG34, based on Louis Stanger's MG30 design at Rheinmetall, and further developed by Heinrich Vollmer at Mauser, entering service in 1936. It was a fine weapon, arguably the most advanced machine gun in the world at that time. Air-cooled and recoil-operated, firing the standard 7.92mm Mauser round at around 800 to 900 rounds per minute. It could be mounted on a bipod for assault, on a tripod for sustained fire, or adapted for vehicle and aircraft use. The MG34 proved itself in the early campaigns of the war, but there was a serious problem. It was expensive and time-consuming to manufacture. Each one required about 150 man-hours to build and cost 327 Reichsmarks. The precision machining demanded high-quality materials and skilled labor. As the war expanded and losses mounted, German factories simply could not keep up with demand. A simpler, faster-to-produce replacement was desperately needed. In 1937, the German Army Ordnance Office issued a contest for an MG34 replacement. 3 companies submitted designs, but the winner was the most unlikely candidate. Metall- und Lackierwarenfabrik Johannes Grossfuss AG of Dobelon was a company that had never manufactured a single weapon in its entire history. Their specialty was pressed and stamped steel components. Their main product was sheet metal lanterns, but that expertise in stamping and pressing metal would prove revolutionary. Dr. Werner Gruner, one of the leading engineers at Grossfuss, was assigned to the project. He knew absolutely nothing about machine guns, so he did something remarkable. He attended a German army machine gunner course to learn how these weapons actually worked in combat. He spoke with soldiers, he learned what they needed. Then he applied his expertise in mass production to create something entirely new. Gruner designed a machine gun whose parts could be cheaply shaped by stamping and pressing, then assembled by welding and riveting. Instead of precision machined components, he used appropriately hardened carbon steel stampings. The result was astonishing. His new design cut manufacturing time from 150 man-hours to just 75, a 50% reduction. The cost dropped from 327 Reichsmarks to 250. It used less raw material and required fewer of the high-grade steel alloys that were becoming scarce in wartime Germany. And here is the unexpected part. Despite being made of cheaper, simpler parts, the prototypes proved more rugged and resistant to jamming than the precisely machined MG34. The weapon worked reliably in mud, sand, extreme cold, and every harsh condition the battlefield could throw at it. After extensive testing, about 1,500 pre-production models, designated MG3941, were completed in 1941 and sent for combat trials. The results were favourable. In early 1942, the weapon was officially adopted as the MG42. Manufacturing contracts went to Grossfuss, Mauserwerke, Gustloffwerke, Steyr, and others. It was first deployed in May 1942 by the Afrika Korps in North Africa, and by mid-1942 was appearing on all fronts. No one could have imagined just how much terror this weapon would soon create. As American troops began encountering the MG42 in North Africa, Italy, and eventually France, they quickly realized this was unlike anything they had faced before. The weapon fired the same 7.92mm Mauser round as the MG34, but at a devastating rate of around 1,200 rounds per minute. Some versions could reach 1,500 rounds per minute depending on bolt configuration. To put that in perspective, American Browning machine guns fired between 450 and 600 rounds per minute. The MG42 was firing twice as fast, sometimes nearly 3 times as fast. At such speeds, the human ear could not distinguish individual shots. Instead of the familiar rhythmic chatter of machine gun fire, soldiers heard something completely alien, a continuous ripping or tearing sound. Some described it like fabric being torn. Others said it sounded like a buzzsaw cutting through wood. This unique acoustic signature gave the weapon its most famous nickname. American GIS called it Hitler's buzzsaw. The Soviets called it the linoleum ripper. The Germans themselves called it the Knochensage, meaning bone saw, and the Hitlersage, meaning Hitler's saw. Before we get into combat, here is an explanation of how the MG42 actually worked, in case you ever wondered what made it fire so incredibly fast. The weapon used a recoil-operated roller locking mechanism. 2 cylindrical rollers positioned in tracks on the bolt head were pushed outward into matching tracks in the barrel extension by the striker sleeve. This locked the bolt in place against the breech. When the weapon fired, the rearward force from the cartridge pushed the barrel and bolt assembly backward together for about 8mm. Then the striker assembly moved back far enough to allow the rollers to move inward, unlocking the bolt head. The bolt continued rearward on its own, extracting and ejecting the spent cartridge. A return spring then pushed the bolt forward again, stripping a new round from the belt, chambering it, and firing again. This cycle repeated for as long as the trigger was pressed. The genius of this system was its simplicity and reliability, with few moving parts that required minimal machining. It also enabled that prodigious rate of fire that made the weapon so terrifying. Now let us talk about how the Americans looked upon it, and why they feared it for several reasons. The first and most obvious was the sound. Troops who had trained on the steady, predictable fire of American machine guns were psychologically unprepared for that alien ripping noise. New replacements especially were affected. The MG42 was so intimidating that the United States War Department took the extraordinary step of producing a training film specifically to combat its psychological effect on soldiers. The film, titled Automatic Weapons American vs. German, was shown to infantry replacements who had not yet seen combat. In one dramatized scene, a green replacement is shown pinned down by MG42 fire, while the narrator points out that the veterans around him seem unbothered. The narrator tries to reassure his audience, explaining that the German gun fires faster, but American guns are more accurate. The film concludes with the claim that their bark is worse than their bite. But that was propaganda. Veterans who actually faced the MG42 knew the truth. Its bite was absolutely devastating. The weapon's effectiveness extended far beyond its psychological impact. The high rate of fire allowed German gunners to lay down an incredibly dense cone of fire. Even short bursts sent dozens of rounds downrange in the blink of an eye. For targets moving across the battlefield, like advancing infantry or low-flying aircraft, that density of fire dramatically increased the probability of hits. German machine gun teams could suppress and pin down larger numbers of enemy troops than would otherwise be possible. This shaped German infantry tactics in a fundamental way. While American and British doctrine emphasized the rifleman as the primary element with machine guns in a supporting role, the Germans did the opposite. They built their entire squad around the machine gun. The MG42 was the center of the squad's firepower. Riflemen existed primarily to protect and supply ammunition to the machine gunner. Each squad ideally had a 6-man crew, a commander, a gunner, a soldier carrying the tripod, and 3 additional troops carrying spare barrels, ammunition, and tools. When American troops attempted infantry assaults against positions defended by an MG42, the German crew would lay down withering suppressive fire. In most cases, all the attacking infantry could do was take cover and wait for a barrel change, wait for the gun to run out of ammunition, or wait for a tank to show up and blast the machine gun nest into oblivion. The Americans and British trained their troops specifically to assault during the brief window of barrel replacement, which took an experienced crew only 5 to 10 seconds. But even that small window came at a cost. The high rate of fire meant the barrel overheated quickly and had to be changed after every 150 to 250 rounds. German crews carried multiple spare barrels and could swap them rapidly through a clever swing-out lever system on the right side of the barrel jacket. There is something important to understand about how this weapon killed. The 7.92mm Mauser round was a full power rifle cartridge with significant energy. At 1200 rounds per minute, the MG42 could put 20 rounds on target in a single second. A short burst lasting 3 seconds sent 60 rounds downrange. Troops caught in the open had almost no chance. The weapon earned its nickname Bonesaw for a reason that is difficult to describe because of content restrictions. But soldiers who witnessed its effects understood all too well what concentrated machine gun fire at that rate could do to a human body. Many American soldiers were unfortunate enough to witness that. The Allies faced Hitler's buzzsaw on every major European battlefield after its introduction. During Operation Avalanche, the Allied invasion of Italy, German defenders used MG42 positions to hold Monte Cassino for approximately 4 months, repelling assault after assault. At Normandy on June 6, 1944, the weapon was present in fortified positions overlooking the beaches. American troops landing at Omaha faced multiple machine gun nests positioned on the bluffs above the beach. The first waves were cut down as they struggled through the surf and across the open sand. Within 10 minutes of landing at the Dog Green sector, a company of the 116th Infantry Regiment suffered catastrophic casualties and was essentially combat ineffective. Across the entire length of Omaha Beach, American forces suffered approximately 2,400 casualties that day. Now, before we get into the weapon's lasting influence, let us look at some of the specialized configurations that made it even more effective. The standard version used a bipod for mobile infantry support, weighing about 25 pounds. When mounted on the Lafette 42 tripod, which weighed an additional 45 pounds, it became a true heavy machine gun capable of sustained fire. With optical sights mounted, It could deliver indirect suppressive fire at ranges up to 2,000 meters. The tripod featured an ingenious recoil-absorbing mechanism that helped control the weapon's climb during automatic fire. Belt feeding used metal links that held 50-round segments. These could be linked together for longer belts of 250 rounds stored in ammunition boxes. Unlike the earlier MG34, the MG42 was designed exclusively for belt feed, dropping the drum magazine option to simplify production and improve reliability at high firing rates. The German army also mounted the MG42 on vehicles, half-tracks and armoured personnel carriers. It served in anti-aircraft roles where its high rate of fire was particularly valuable against fast-moving targets. Author James H. Wilbanks described the MG42 as being nearly everywhere on the European battlefield, either in gun emplacements or vehicle mounted on everything from half-tracks to panzers. Here is something that shows just how much the Americans respected and feared this weapon. During the war, US ordnance became greatly impressed with the MG42. They ordered the construction of test copies chambered in .30 caliber, designated the T-24, to evaluate the potential of copying the German design directly. The attempt failed primarily because the .30 caliber cartridge was longer than the German round, and they did not properly adjust the receiver dimensions to compensate, but it demonstrated clear American interest. After the war, American weapons designers studied both the MG42 and the German FG42 paratrooper rifle extensively. They took the innovative belt feed mechanism of the MG42 and combined it with operating principles from other designs. The result, adopted in 1957, was the M60 machine gun. The M60 feed tray and belt mechanism were directly derived from the MG42. The trigger mechanism of the Belgian FN MAG, known in American service as the M240, is a virtual copy of the MG42 design. The weapon that American soldiers feared most went on to influence the guns they would carry into battle for the next several decades, shaping a lasting legacy. As for the MG42 itself, production during the war reached impressive numbers despite constant Allied bombing of German industry. Over 400,000 units were manufactured between 1942 and 1945. 17,915 in 1942, 116,725 in 1943, 211,806 in 1944, and 61,877 in the final months of the war in 1945. By 1943, MG42 production surpassed MG34 production and continued to do so until Germany's surrender. The weapon proved so effective that it outlived the regime that created it. When West Germany rearmed and formed the Bundeswehr in the 1950s, they adopted a modified version rechambered for 7.62 NATO ammunition, designated the MG3. That weapon kept the same blistering rate of fire and basic design. Today, Germany and over 40 other countries still use descendants of Hitler's buzzsaw. The Yugoslav M53 was essentially an unchanged MG42, produced using captured German machinery and technical drawings. The Austrian MG74 is another direct descendant. Elements of the design live on in machine guns around the world, a lasting legacy. It is fascinating how far this weapon travelled from such an unlikely beginning. A company that made sheet metal lanterns, an engineer who knew nothing about firearms, a design philosophy that prioritized mass production over precision craftsmanship. And yet the result was one of the most effective and influential machine guns ever created, A weapon that fired so fast it changed infantry tactics, spawned a psychological warfare countermeasure, and influenced firearm design for generations to come. I said this about the Browning M250 caliber. How fascinating it is that such an old design is still used today in modernized form. But the MG42 is equally remarkable, coming from World War II and still serving in modified versions with no retirement on the horizon. So there you have it. The story of why American soldiers truly feared the MG42 goes far beyond its devastating firepower. It was the psychological terror of that unearthly sound, the tactical nightmare of facing a weapon that could empty a belt in seconds, and the grim reality of what happened to those caught in its path. Hitler's buzzsaw earned every one of its dark nicknames, and the veterans who survived its fury never forgot the experience.